For several years, I worked as a call center agent. I spent my days calling people, trying to sell them various things. I'm sure all of you have received this kind of call at least once in your lives. A telephone operator, for example, trying to sell you a mobile plan. Let's be honest, we could all do without these calls. We've all felt that urge, myself included, before I switched sides, to tell the guy or gal trying to push their offer to get lost. Very often, the person on the other end doesn't even have time to finish their introductory sentence before we've already hung up or blurted out, "I'm not interested. Goodbye." I couldn't stand those kinds of calls. Then one day I received a job offer to become the guy who calls people all day. When I took my first calls, I realized something. Many people seem unaware that a human being is calling them. It's as if they think we're soulless, heartless robots incapable of feeling any emotion. I do exactly as I'm told, I follow the script given to me, and I don't decide whom I should or shouldn't call. As a result, I often got shut down, and not always very politely. That wasn't the only downside of the job. It was repetitive, too. We kept saying the same thing over and over, and the days were long. There were, however, some positives. Whenever I managed to sell a subscription to someone I didn't even know from Adam to Eve, I must admit I was filled with a sense of pride. That didn't completely erase the inconveniences, but over time I got used to it. I had developed my little routines. Then one day, a phone call turned my life upside down. This was about a year ago. That call terrified me. I lost sleep for several weeks. I had already encountered my share of oddities during my many years of loyal service at the call center. But this time, I was seriously freaked out, to the point that for the first time in my career, I had to take several weeks off on sick leave. I was traumatized. It was a Friday, nearly at the end of my shift. It must have been around 7:30 p.m. We were nearing the end of our call list, so there were a lot of answering machines and quite a bit of waiting time between calls. I'd been waiting for 3 minutes when a new contact finally appeared. I began as usual. "Hello, this is Max from sales." The man on the other end of the phone interrupted me, telling me to stop immediately. Up to that point, nothing unusual. This happens often. I paused for a second to listen to what he had to say. Usually, people who say that go on to complain either about the calls or to insist that they aren't interested. But this time he said nothing. I could only hear his heavy breathing. So I continued, "I'm calling you to..." "Shut up, Max." My irritation began to mount. It was the end of the day, and although I was used to rude people, this was really getting on my nerves. You have to understand that as call center agents, we have strict guidelines not to talk down to our clients, and no matter what they say, we're supposed to remain polite and courteous. So even though I felt like telling that idiot to get lost, I simply replied, "Sir, I apologize if..." He cut me off again. "Stop calling me Max. I don't like it." "Sir, it's an automated system calling you. Perhaps you received a call from one of my colleagues." "No, I know it's you calling me all the time, Max." While speaking and listening to him, I checked the call history. I began to feel uneasy. He was right. It was always my name on the record. I had always sent him to voicemail. He had never answered before. This was the first time. To you, it might not seem strange at all, but I assure you, it wasn't normal that I was always the one reaching this guy. On a call platform, there are several teams. In mine, there were nearly 20 people. The calls are distributed randomly by software among the available agents. Logically, my name shouldn't have been the only one showing up in the history. The system had already called him 8 times that month, and it was always me who got through, never one of my colleagues. I tried to reassure myself by thinking that perhaps the software was malfunctioning. It wouldn't have been the first time. The fact that my name appeared systematically must have been a bug, and the guy had no way of knowing that. The same number was always calling him, and that annoyed him. He wasn't singling me out specifically. "If we contact you, it's because..." He interrupted me once more. "I told you to shut up, Tom." I was stunned. Max is just a pseudonym I use among many others. My real name is Tom. How could he know that? "I'm Max, sir." I tried to control my voice. I didn't want to let on how disturbed I was. "No, you're Tom, and you keep calling me. I don't like it. I'll make sure this never happens again." I wasn't quite sure I understood what he meant, whether he was actually threatening me. My eyes were fixed on his name as I tried to recall if I recognized it from somewhere, or if it wasn't just a bad joke from a friend who recognized my voice. But no matter how hard I looked, his name was completely unknown to me. He continued, "I know you call me from a call center in northern England." That was true too, but I tried to console myself by thinking that northern England was vague, and to my knowledge, several companies work in telemarketing. Except then, he gave me the exact city and the name of the company where I worked. He even detailed my work schedule. I was supposed to be off the following Thursday, and he told me he would find me then. All I wanted to do was hang up. But you're not allowed to hang up on a customer. I still tell myself that if I had hung up, no one would have blamed me. It was an exceptional case. Instead, I sat there like an idiot, eyes glued to the computer, continuing to listen. "I'll make you stop harassing people. Your navy blue scarf will be very useful to shut your big mouth." Then he hung up. I was paralyzed. Needless to say, I was indeed wearing a navy blue scarf. I sat there doing nothing for a good 5 minutes, my hands trembling. My colleagues noticed that something was wrong and asked what was happening. Since the calls were recorded, my supervisor listened to the conversation. I still hoped it was a joke, that my boss would say, "It's nothing, don't worry." But instead I saw him break down as the recording played. The police were contacted. I was interrogated to confirm that I truly didn't know who my caller was. An investigation took place, and afterward I refused to go back to work. My doctor put me on sick leave. I was placed under police surveillance, especially on that infamous Thursday when the man said he'd find me. Nothing happened that day, nor on the following days. The investigation led nowhere. They never managed to track down the guy. The number I'd been calling was no longer in service, and the name didn't match any current or former customer of the operator I worked for. Even now, I have no idea who that man was. I had to take medication to calm myself down. I was so stressed. I was forced to take sleeping pills just to get some rest. I kept having the same nightmare, the guy breaking into my home to kill me. Several weeks later, I managed to pull myself together and went back to work. I could have changed jobs. I might even have needed to change then, but I don't have any qualifications, and I really didn't know what else I could do. The first day, and even the first week, went about normally. I was still anxious, but to a lesser degree than during my sick leave. Then, after several weeks, I had nearly recovered from that horrible experience. 2 months later, I was moved to a different shift, which meant I would be working for another operator. After a few days of training with new colleagues, we set off to make calls. 2 weeks after that, the nightmare began again. Around 6 p.m., a new contact appeared. It was under a woman's name. I began my pitch, and this time I was using the pseudonym Alex. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. Nothing unusual. This sort of thing happens quite often. I continued, presenting the purpose of my call. Fiber had been installed in her town. "Is that you again, Tom?" It was the same voice as before. I was petrified, unable to move or utter a word. How was it that I kept getting this psycho? It wasn't the same name. I was sure of it. I had been traumatized enough not to forget it. He continued, "I missed our appointment. You were too surrounded. For a brief moment, I even considered being lenient. But you've called me 6 times now, Tom. I'm not going to let this slide. See you soon." He hung up. I checked the call history, and once again he was right. I had called him 5 times before today, and I had always sent him straight to voicemail. The nightmare was repeating itself. I reported it again to my superiors, and another investigation took place, but unsurprisingly, it led nowhere. It was impossible to trace this man. That very day, I decided to quit. I never set foot in a call center again. Weeks and months passed. I found a job as a sales clerk in a shop. I thought I was finally done with all that when one day a blocked number called my cell phone. I answered automatically. "Don't think I've forgotten you, Tom. Nice leather jacket." It was him. I hung up immediately. He didn't try to call back. I thought I was going to faint from terror. How had he gotten my cell number? The most terrifying part was that I actually did own a leather jacket. He was out there somewhere, and he was watching me. I looked around. There were people everywhere. I was in a shopping mall, but no one seemed to be staring or watching me. I blended into the crowd, and once outside the mall, I ran to the nearest police station. I figured that if I ran fast enough, no matter where that guy was, I'd manage to shake him off. Once again, the police were of no help. It was impossible to trace the call. Of course. After that, I changed my number and even moved to another region, hoping that would be enough to escape that lunatic. I have panic attacks every time my phone rings. For a while, I even considered giving up having a cell phone altogether. It has been 5 months since that last call. Nothing has happened since. I keep trying to convince myself it was just a tasteless joke. Having changed my number and moved, I tell myself there's no way for that guy to find me. And yet, I'm writing all of this today because I need help. For the past 2 hours, my cell phone hasn't stopped ringing. It's a blocked number, and I'm too scared to answer. It's the middle of the night, and I'm too afraid to leave my home. I'm sure it's him, and that he's watching me from somewhere.